We're going to talk about trade unions now. Before we do, though, we need to talk about an old-fashioned term you don't hear very often. The term is class war. And you don't hear it very often because the class element is a bit funny now. Fundamentally, if you own a factory, you want to pay your workers as little as possible, so you make the most out of your factory. But if you are a worker, you want to get the most pay you can for your hard work. You work hard all day, you want as much money for it as you can get. And that fundamental disagreement between the factory owner and the workers on the factory floor is what's known as class war. Because both sides cannot win if that becomes a conflict. Obviously, today, things are a bit different, and when we're talking about workers, we're talking about teachers, and they aren't doing it quite the way that factory people used to do it. So it is more complicated than that, but the fundamental crisis is this battle between the person who owns the means of production and the workers. And that's where all of these things come from as a problem. Unions were been around for a while, you know. In the medieval times, some people started to get together to organise, to unite, and then negotiate as one. That's what union is, right? A single worker going to the boss and saying, I want some more money, they can get fired. If all the workers come together, then it's much harder. If they go on strike, things are problematic for the bosses. The Industrial Revolution was when it really kicked off. There had a lot more factories going on, a lot more workers, all this stuff. We saw a lot more unions forming. And then like in 1834, there was a group called the Tolpuddle Martyrs. Well, they took upon it themselves to set up a union. For doing so, they were shipped to Australia, which is like the punishment back then. The government was massively anti-union. Obviously, the factory were anti-union, blah, 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 blah. But it wasn't long before the unions helped to form the Labour Party. Conservatives in the House of Commons love to say you're run by the unions, but actually their history is part of the unions. The unions have won so many battles over the past. Like the minimum wage was partly through them. They were campaigning as £4 now, like a long time ago. Equal pay, annual leave. Like annual leave existed before, but the unions have got all of us more annual leave. Now, that doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't mean that everyone likes them. Obviously, employers aren't keen. You know, Amazon famously don't want the unions. But also people rely on workers, you know? Like, we're going to talk about Birmingham in a bit, but because they're in a union, the bin workers of Birmingham mean that all the bins are out and it's horrific. People who are anti-union would say, how can you allow that? Public sector is always where unions work strongest recently. That means that public sector workers have better paying conditions than their private sector colleagues. And that's not fair. And it means that things have become really ineffective. So again, capitalists would say that the free market is what makes things work efficiently. Supply and demand. What happens if you supply your labour but there's not much demand is that you don't get so much money, but it makes things efficient and it works and it's slick. That's what they say. Trade unions are a barrier to the free market, and they disrupt and make the whole country less effective, less productive than it would have been otherwise. People really disagree on the positives or negatives or whatever of trade unions, but that's all academic unless we have a look at what that means right now, today, the issues the government are facing. Before the 2024 general election, the Conservative government was quite anti-settling with the unions because they were like, you're asking for too much money, we're not going to give it to you. And then everyone would go on strike, and then it was difficult. So in the early part of 2024 alone, I've written down just a few people who are on strike. Train drivers, NHS workers, baggage handlers, teachers, museum staff, border force, the pensions regulator, bus drivers, school support staff, TAs, Cardiff rescue workers. Things were pretty real. Like, if the NHS staff are striking, then the NHS can't operator capacity, which means that people's operations are cancelled. Right? That really matters. People's operations need to go ahead. So Labour came in and Labour basically paid everyone off. They said that we need to get this money because we need to get people back to work. Labour have paid it off. Everyone chill. We're all okay until we get to 2025. Now, the canary in this coal mine, if that's not an insensitive way of putting it, is Birmingham, where the refuse workers are striking. And the reason they're striking is that some of their kind of middle management roles have been scrapped. Birmingham City Council say those roles don't exist anywhere else. They also say they can't afford them. And they also say it's quite complicated stuff about equal pay there as well. It's a long story with Birmingham Council. Birmingham Council also say that they've offered them training elsewhere and other roles which are equally high paid, so no one should be losing out on pay. The unions say that loads of their members are missing out on pay, and the whole thing isn't fair. It's constructive dismissal. So all the Birmingham bin workers are out. The union still says this deal is not good enough. Birmingham says it's a perfectly good deal, and it's all they can pay for. And we don't know, I do not know what's going to happen next. If the Birmingham refuse workers are given paying conditions that are better than workers around the country, I would imagine those workers around the country are going to strike too. I'd imagine we get a lot more strikes from bin workers over the next few months, unless these current ones settle and it's all fine. But those aren't the only strikes. You see, strikes come in waves. This government keeps talking about how little money it has, which means they can't afford much. They have allocated 2.8% pay rises for basically across the board in the public service. Now, the pay review body has come back and said teachers should get 4% pay rise and NHS workers 3% pay rise. These are recommendations, but it's put the government in a really tricky place because either they say, no, you're not going to have anything more than 2.8. We can't afford anything more than 2.8. You're not going to have it, in which case teachers and nurses almost certainly go on strike. Or they could say, hey, yeah, let's go for it. 4%, you teachers, go on. But they do not pay for it. They ask schools to cover the extra pay by cutting elsewhere. It's effectively a funding cut to schools to pay teachers more, and schools are already talking about striking if their pay is not fully funded by the government. So that leaves option 3, which is the government says, yeah, sure, here you go, bang. Throws the dollar down, but then, well, if you've been paying attention, you know that there's no money. This government has no money left. So what, is it going to cut somewhere else? Is it going to raise taxes somewhere else? Like every penny the government spends that it hasn't budgeted before, and the school's budget's about 70 billion quid. I don't know how much of that is actually wages, but 4%, or even the 1.2% extra above 2.8%, is a hefty whack that the government weren't expecting, don't want to have to pay for, don't have the funds, don't have the ready money sitting around to go. Do you know what? 2025 is going to be a tricky year for Keir Starmer. It's already a tricky year for Keir Starmer. Being in government, it's no fun.